Afternoon, Takumbo Adela Khan here with some reflections on the current moment and the current maelstrom and the current miscues in our society. I want to take a moment to reflect upon where we are, how far we've come, and the pastness of the present and the present that has been part of our past. It's important that when we come to take stock, when we come to take what Antonio Gramsci called a critical self-inventory of the American personality, when we look into the psyche of America, when we try to do a diagnosis of American civilization, it's important that we understand that our roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, are connected to our roots, R-O-T-S. Having said that, I would like to just take a few minutes to talk about the trek, the tribe, and the trial. The trek, the tribe, and the trial. It's important to understand that the United States of America was formed because of a revolution, because certain petit bourgeoisie merchants who desired to own property felt oppressed, repressed, alienated, and silenced by the British monarchy, and decided to throw off the shackles of feudalism and the medieval system of governance. And so the American Revolution was born because people who came from Europe, primarily British English speaking, no longer wanted to be under the thumb or perhaps even the knee, if you will, of the crown. The central signifier, the key touchstone of this revolution was the desire to own property. Before, it was life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. From the writings of John Locke, who was the major 17th century British figure that shaped the architecture of English-speaking modernity, it was life, liberty, and property. When we look at the language of property in terms of English-speaking peoples, it has a peculiar history. They wanted to own property, and in owning property, they engaged in trade with lands all over the world, including Africa. And in transporting Africans here in slave ships, not only did Europeans own Africans, but it's important that they made Africans into property. That's the beginning of the trek. So when we begin to talk about what blackness means and what whiteness means and democracy and freedom and justice, we must understand that Africans who were brought here, extracted from the hinterlands of West Africa for the most part, transported over the Atlantic, where the migratory patterns of the sharks begin to change, following those ships, looking for bodies that were sinking down into the belly of the Atlantic. That African bodies were turned into objects. In other words, Africans were thingified and objectified and were commodified. And it's not so much that wealth was extracted from them. It's not so much that many of them worked for 244 years. Not so much that they were separated from past and progeny, according to my professor, Dr. Orlando Patterson of the sociology department at Harvard. It was that people were thingified and objectified and pushed out of the human family, told that they had no right to the human family, no right to integrity, no right to beauty, no right to decency and dignity, told that they were ineducable and uncivilized and unenlightened and uncouth. And so therefore, when we begin to look at the trek, we must understand that there was a tribalization of the trek. And the tribalization of the trek is how the construct of race, of whiteness and blackness were introduced. I raised the question to my students, and I raised the question to audiences all over the world. How do people who live Madrid and Manchester, who live London and Lisbon in Europe, get on a boat, land someplace, the New World, 6 weeks later, and become white? And how do people who are transported from Ghana and Togo, Republic of Benin and Gambia and Nigeria, people whose native tongues are Efik and Ibibio and Akan and Ewe and Hausa and Fulani and Igbo and Yoruba, how do they get on a boat and 6 weeks later they become black? That in order for us to talk about the trek, we must talk about the tribalization and what that means, what whiteness and blackness mean in a country like this based on race. It simply means those who are in and those who are out, those who have a right to rule and those that are commodified, objectified, enslaved. And so even the colorization of America is there to determine who is in, who's out, who is somebody, who's a thing, who has the right to breathe and who has the right to be owned. And so the tribalization of America follows the trek of America. And so because we have this legacy, because race is the chief signifier, the central and regnant metaphor of American civilization, it's impossible to talk about America without talking about race. And race now becomes the gadfly of American civilization. And now we get to the moments of trial, whether we talk about the fact that while Americans who were fighting for their freedom were still enslaving black Americans, where we're talking about the social contract and the racial contract, where rich white men who owned property were able to shape the laws and shape the Constitution, but women and Native Americans and black Americans and poor whites were not allowed into the social contract. And the struggle of freedom has been who is allowed to vote, who is allowed to say who rules in America. But now you get to the trial of America. This trial of America erupts every 30 or 40 or 50 years. And it's important that we have the proper lenses to understand where we are. The trial of America, I believe, is fed by a few elements. Number one, the present moment is fed by the fact that many of us for the last 3 months have been pent up in our homes, and we have been exposed to race large. We have been exposed to the killings, the murder of unarmed black people. That is one impulse that is feeding the current moment of discontent. We must also recognize that the current moment of discontent is being fed by the fact that when you have 40 million jobs, those are not all black people that are missing. That if you will, as one of my good mentors, Sister Sandra Thurman, said, that white people are feeling black. What does that mean? That white people are singing the blues, that white people are feeling oppressed and isolated and alienated, that the white people are feeling that nobody cares for them, and that's a particular element that is feeding the current moment of trial. That is why on the city streets from LA to New York to Minneapolis to Dayton to Cincinnati to Philadelphia to Dallas, that is why you're seeing a multiracial, multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-religious movement that is saying, what is going on with America? There's a third element that is feeding the current moment, and that is to say that you have decision makers, occupiers of the White House, that are tyrannical in their behavior, that have engaged in a pattern of practice of thumbing their noses at the Constitution, the fundamental documents of the United States. And so we're living in a contradiction by which, even though those fundamental documents of the United States, on the one hand, have not included all peoples, and there's been a struggle for many other peoples to be included in this document, even those that have enjoyed the document the most are thumbing their noses at it. And so there's a deconstruction, if you will, a radical, murdersome deconstruction of the rule of law, of a denial of the rights, of the democratic freedoms that have long held together the patchwork of America. And so there's this feeling that there's an impunity in high places, that there's a gangsterization, to use my mentor Cornel West's words, of America, that yes, there may be some looting on the ground, but for years there's been looting in high places in corporate America, what one writer calls silent riots, where people with power have gangstered the law and they have overrun and run amok on the systems of protection of American civil liberties. But now we also come to another impulse that I believe that is driving the moment, that is connected to all three. And that is to say that there is a sensitivity, if you will, to blackness. I have friends that are calling me from across the country asking, what can they do? And while I do not believe in manipulating and guilt, and while I am not interested in white guilt, I do want to be present to the moment that we're in. But we need to understand that we're in a moment now because many of the same cries for justice, many of the songs for peace, many of the poems that you hear for righteousness have been present in the national body politic for many seasons. However, because middle America was enjoying a certain amount of economic prosperity and social freedom, many Americans did not hear those cries, I can't breathe, Black Lives Matter. The democracy that we've known is being taken from us. And so in a moment of white fragility, in a moment of white anxiety, there seems to be a connection between black calls for justice and white insecurity. And so I want to say to brothers and sisters that I am a little bit less optimistic about this moment. I have hope, I am interested in justice, and I celebrate the collaborative impulses that we find. But I do believe that once the theme parks open and once the sports become center stage, I do believe that the appetite for justice that we find in the city squares of today will begin to wane. And so I call on my white brothers and sisters to do whatever it takes, that when the jobs come back and when we flatten the curve, or as the curve becomes bent, I challenge you to not be like Dives in the scriptures that was indifferent to the pain of others. I challenge you to continue to stay aware and alert. I challenge you to develop relationships with black and brown peoples from across the world, but especially in America, who are suffering. To my black and brown brothers and sisters, I encourage you to seize this moment, not to destroy, but to create, not to complain, but to commit, not just to be angry, but to transform your anger into administrative anointing, programmatic planning, to protest, but to pray, and to have principled purpose, to seize the moment, to find, if you will, Christ in the crises. Organize, pray, develop businesses, collaborate, read more, pray more, organize churches, find resources for this moment, because we do not know how long this moment will last. The summer is here. We may have a season to march, but as soon as the weather begins to change, as soon as the cultural circumstances begin to morph, we will find fewer people willing to march. And so, my brothers and my sisters, we can seize the moment. We can make this a Christ moment. We have to allow the Holy Spirit to dictate our moves, because we may not see this moment again for a long time. And so I leave you with that great hymn of the church, a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, who sent his son my soul to save and fitted for the sky. To serve this present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do the master's will. Don't forget, we are living 400 years of history. Please remember that when I spoke to one of our great disciples here, Minister EJ, he said, Pastor, the cries on the street are not just for Brother George Floyd. They are for Brother Emmett Till. In other words, that young fella, that young brilliant mind said that people are not crying for what just happened for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. People are crying for what has happened over the last 40 years and 400 years. That people have read history. People are carrying on the pains of their foreparents, and people are saying it's not going to happen anymore. Yes, we want to be peaceful, but sometimes people don't hear the peaceful cries until they hear the cries for peace. And so, my brothers and my sisters, let us remember, yes, even when we take the nonviolence route, that they killed Malcolm in Manhattan, Medgar in Mississippi, and Martin in Memphis. For me, I'm an apostle of nonviolence because I believe violence begets violence. But I want us to be sure that this is a moment in which only God can shape and direct. And so we look to the hills from whence cometh our help. Our help cometh from the Lord. We thank you for people all over the world that are mourning, that are marching. But just know, we must turn this from marching to ministry if we're going to serve the Master. This is Takumbo Delacan. My brothers and my sisters, we'll look to you again on this channel.